welcome to Lawyer of the Week. Lawyer of the Week is creating a global community of lawyers, solicitors, and their support to inform and to encourage each other.
Hi, my name is Pamela Denis, and I work with successful and focused lawyers to help them to achieve their peak performance as well as to establish their legacy. Thank you so much for joining us this week as we listen in and watch someone who is a peak performer who is also working to establish their legacy. Let's listen.
Hello, my name is Pamela Denis, and I'd like to welcome you to Lawyer of the Week. We are very privileged to have Denis-Smith with us today, and let me tell you a little bit about Dana. Denis-Smith is the founder and CEO of Legal Business Obelisk Support, a tech-enabled business that matches work to 1,300 highly skilled lawyers that want to work flexibly around their family commitments. Dana is also the founder of First 100 Years, a 5-year project charting the journey of women in the legal profession since 1919. She is also before becoming an entrepreneur, Dana worked as a journalist. She later trained and qualified as a solicitor with Linklater's in London and Amsterdam. Dana has received numerous accolades for her work, being recognized as a legal innovator by Legal Week and the Financial Times, and as an entrepreneur by Management Today and Daily Mail. In 2018, Dana is a finalist for Legal Personality of the Year at the LexisNexis Awards. She holds a BSc in History and MSc in Political Economy, both from the London School of Economics. Married to a barrister and mother to a daughter, she now lives in London, having grown up in Transylvania, Romania. Welcome, Dana. Welcome. We're so happy to have you as our Lawyer of the Week.
It's an honor. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to ask you our Lawyer of the Week questions. And our first question is when and what made you decide to become a solicitor?
That's a very good question because it was meeting my husband to be, and the numerous publications he brought home. As you said, I started off as a journalist straight out of high school, and it never crossed my mind to be a lawyer at that point. In a way, I was a challenger of the system because that's what journalists do. And I grew up under communism, and the rule of law was pretty problematic. So I didn't have a desire to be in the justice system as I was growing up. So having started as a journalist, I suddenly felt developing much expertise. There didn't seem to be a lot of depth in my journalism for some reason. So I thought law seemed to be I met a lot of interesting people through my fiance, and I was reading all these publications, and I seemed to be very interested. And one day I said, I think I'll qualify as a lawyer. And it usually that's how it works with me. I only need to realize the thought for the action to follow. So I embarked on it very quickly. I thought it was also centered on something that was quite, journalistic, because I thought it was all about language and words, and I felt it would transfer quite well. So I had that skill in that space. So that was really how I started.
Oh, that's very interesting. Now, were you all married while you were studying to become a solicitor?
I was actually. So when I started my education, I was already married, and I was one of. I started doing the conversion courses in the evening because I kept my day job as a journalist And I started looking for training contracts very quickly after. So it was a way a new journey in a new life, I guess, quite rightly put by you. I didn't think of it like that before, but yes, I was married at that point.
Interesting. Your husband must be very supportive and a very fascinating man to support you during that journey of being newly married and you're now studying to become a solicitor.
He was actually extremely disappointed at our wedding. Obviously, we had a lot of his colleagues, and he was being congratulated for not making the usual lawyer mistake of marrying another lawyer and marrying a journalist. And he said, "Yes, I am, I am different." And as I was, when I broke the news of my interest to him, he was very enthusiastic. He basically said, "I don't really know why you want to do it. If it's for money, it's not the right way. If it's for, very hard work." So, and he said, "I think you have talents that go beyond that profession. Really, you don't need to do it." But I did it anyway, because that's what we do.
That's really great. So tell me a little bit about your practice when you were a lawyer, when you were practicing at like Linklater's and then the law firms.
Yeah, so I didn't practice very long, but when I started and I qualified as an employment lawyer, that was, if you like, the area that I liked the most. I was very lucky, and they had a program seconding people to a charity called the Free Representation Unit, where it would give you an insight into the other side of employment disputes where people were unrepresented. And obviously, when you're in a very large corporate law firm, you end up always on the corporate side. Mm-hmm. So my experience in the firm was very different from the experience of the charity. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed it because I realized I enjoyed advocacy, which if you're a solicitor, you don't really get to do. I like the tribunal preparation, the discipline that comes with it. But I also learned how important it is to have that help and representation for people that are going through a very traumatic experience. It taught me firsthand how close these relationships are. They are a kind of family type of connection between the employer and the employee. And when it goes bad, it's very bad and very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to articulate the case better and to win for them was really, really rewarding. So I really like that. I like the fact that in a way it was also back to being a journalist, because it was a personal story for them. Every single person I represented had a trauma of a different style. And so that was interesting to be able to put that into words and, life in words that maybe sometimes they weren't articulate enough to put on paper themselves. So anyway, so employment was my direction, but I decided I wanted to go into business.
Wonderful. So tell me a little bit about your first business and what was the most challenging part of beginning your new business?
This is actually my first business. The business was quite easy because I literally said, I don't want to continue to be a lawyer in a law firm. I want to do something to bring experience today into a new me. And so I asked myself, what can I do? And so I very quickly went through my strengths. And I said, well, I can write. I have a good analytical mind. I'm really well educated. I've been in the city. I understand the cultural background. And I'm really interested in international politics. So I can just do political risk analysis and economics. And so I started a business in that space. Easy peasy, expert entrepreneur, mm-hmm. Called Doom. Because you basically end up with a business that is only as big as you can produce. Anyway, so my first business was very much a consulting business where everybody wanted my opinions, my forecast, will Argentina vote Italy and all these things, which was very interesting. But nobody really wanted my freelancers. They always wanted me. And so I realized that looking to run a business and set something up that was bigger than me. And so I kept looking for the idea. And so Obelisk was my second idea.
Yes.
And it came around probably from if you like, a kind of a bit of information I stored away when I was working as this realization that a lot of talent was being left behind, that people that were progressing were the ones that could give it all. And there was no compromise space for people to work without, having the same kind of ultimate ambition to rise to the very top, which not everybody does. And so I had that information, but obviously I did nothing with it until I went on a trip to India, and all the rage that outsourcing, was in fashion, and law firms were sending work to India and the Philippines, and everybody wanted cost cutting and this stuff. And I thought, why are they sending the work so far? There's so many people that are talented so near. So I started thinking, how can I create a model that can be trusted by both sides and create a more, local labor market, if you like, where everybody ends up winning that little bit more rather than being left completely out. And that's how the business came around, from this discovery of needing to be more efficient within the labor market, not leaving people behind.
Oh, so 1,300 lawyers now are working in your organization?
It's probably more than that by now. It's hard to update. I think we should just say 1,000 plus. The number grows day by day, basically. There's a lot of people. This new way of working coincides with a change in work. Generally speaking, a lot of people are asking, what is the future of work? And I think in a way, I asked the question at a time when it was definitely not fashionable in the legal profession. A lot of people weren't really thinking about returning anybody, young, old, or of any gender. So we were kind of at the forefront saying, there's something really wrong here, and maybe the firms don't really know how to address it, or maybe they don't actually do some solution. But anyway, this was 2010, so much has changed in the last few years, which is a great thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. Now, you first came to my attention on Twitter when you were, and that you were doing the first 100 years.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
That is my other full-time job without having full-time capacity to do it. So I guess I became, again, part of the same experience I had with my business, because as you can imagine, when I first came on the market saying it isn't right that people with skills shouldn't be engaged if they have a need for different ways of working, I had a lot of pushback. So success wasn't overnight any a stretch of the imagination. So I became very aware of the kind of, if you like, the negative aspects of diversity conversations around the need to change, but I felt we were trapped in a very negative rhetoric. And again, it's one of those thoughts that you put away, but you don't necessarily do anything with. And then one day, my husband's alumni magazine arrived. As usual, I always did. And I came across this photograph from 1982 of one of the very large law firms having a party, and there was only one woman in the middle. And suddenly I was struck by the lack of historic context to the diversity conversation. I suddenly felt, I now understand why I don't understand. And I also understand why it's all negative, because you have no sense of progress, because you have no starting point.
Yes.
So I ask people, when have women started to be lawyers? And everybody gave me a different answer, and invariably was a longer period of time than the reality.
Mhm.
So I suddenly felt women are talking about advancing, but without the, if you like, the tools to be accurate and therefore persuasive. Then I realized I knew nothing about the whole history. You know, when I went and I identified 1919 as the year of women actually being allowed to enter the profession, I realized that I had, even though I was a lawyer, I had no knowledge of anybody from before.
Mhm.
And if the knowledge existed, it was within very, very isolated, whether they were academics, some people maybe barristers, but there was no consensus. There was no embracing of the history of women. And so, because once the thought crosses my mind, action immediately follows. That's my personality. I immediately decided to set up a project and, fill my days with more exciting uh, historic research. So I just wanted to change, I guess, the conversation and frame it slightly differently and look at this positive story to learn to then press the accelerator on the changes we really need to see rather than asking for all the changes,
Mhm.
some of which have actually happened. And also, it's very easy to say things are not moving, but when you look in the past and say we went from 0 women to 50% of the profession, that's a huge transformation. So
Huge.
we should own that, and we should be positive about owning that, because it's
Mhm.
fine. It's a positive journey with a negative one. Anyway, so that's the motivation. The motivation was to create a really easy to understand, accessible library,
Mhm.
and go out and unearth the various stories across the profession, bring them into one unified platform, and make it free for all,
Yes.
and easy to understand. Ideal, but hopefully followed by action, and hopefully achieving at least 50% of that.
Curious, did you find more information about the first uh, solicitor or in 1919?
Yeah, so we did. I started the project and I put together this quite comprehensive timeline over 100 years. So a lot of research went into that. And we identified all the first women. We sourced their photographs. We tried to find local articles that, mention their arrival. But obviously, even though in 1919 there was a new law that said you cannot reject a woman because she's, it still took 3 more years for the first woman to be coming through because they needed to do the training.
Right.
Uh, but before 1919, their application would be rejected because they were women. But
Mhm.
it didn't, fast track them without doing what all the men did.
Right.
So we have another, we'll have a lot of centenaries to celebrate over the
Absolutely.
next 100 years. We'll keep celebrating the first 100 years, if you know what I mean. Um,
Well, that is so fascinating. That's really exciting to me. I love history and I love the history of women and the ones who were the pioneers. I can't wait to read it myself. um, now tell us about some of your biggest.
I have to say they all.
Were you about to say something? No?
No, I was just coughing. Sorry.
Okay, all right. So can you tell me about, or tell us about what your biggest challenges are?
Generally speaking,
Hmm.
with the business or the project or keeping it all together.
Probably keeping it all together.
Um, yeah, I think the challenges are quite different. Being an entrepreneur, being responsible for a lot of people's salaries, every month, still challenging the convention around the market, because although flexibility is more accepted, the nature of how fragmented is the flexibility we want to offer is not accepted. So we accept the concept, but we don't accept the reality. We're still pushing a lot of people out of work because they don't fit an ideal that I'm not quite sure is properly defined. So I still feel there's a lot of people being left behind from the marketplace, and they don't really have a voice. So we keep pushing for us to be their voice. So that's a kind of different challenge of trying to say to clients, just because we're a good business that cares about its purpose, it doesn't make us a business that isn't able to deliver the excellence of service you expect. Mm-hmm. It doesn't follow because you're a good business that you can't be anything but a charitable business. So there's a lot of work around communication, really getting them to accept that it's possible to do good and be profitable and be a well-run operation. On the project, I think the biggest danger is the fact that I too love history. I have a degree in history, and I'm becoming a little bit of the expert in the project. So I feel the threat of my first business coming back to haunt me. So I am very keen to expand it and get the participation of the profession in the widest possible way, and really engage with students, get them to write, getting people to submit content and discover people for us rather than always us leading, because we have a huge archive already. So really that kind of outreach and amplification is critical, I think, at this stage of the business, of the project. Then we obviously have to curate the whole of the next 2 years, up anniversary coming up in December 2029. So it's a huge program. And as I said, it's completely run by volunteers.
Oh, wonderful.
So it's quite an ambitious project that is basically backed by a bunch of passionate, crazy people that put so much time of their own into it, which is just fantastic. But it is, it requires quite a lot of management. And, I also have a 7-year-old child. I still have my husband, who is a great a great supporter and researcher for the project.
Oh,
so there's all these different tracks that I'm trying to ride, if you like, but I'm trying to keep to those rather than add new bows to my instrument. I think if I focus on these 3 things and I deliver, I can then start something new. So I'm quite focused on not trying to spread too thin.
Mm-hmm. So are you going to have like a celebration for the 200 years?
I think we're going to have a repeat celebration, one of those loop celebrations. When you press the what's the name, the shuffle button on your player. It's going to be a bit like that. It's going to be always on. Next year for sure. That's the plan, because to be honest, I want everybody to remember the anniversary, what it means. I want women to really understand how important it is to know their past and how much stronger they will be. And that's only achievable by different ways of saying the same thing numerous times on repeat.
Well, that sounds wonderful. That's something I think I might even want to come across the pond to attend.
Brilliant.
So now, what legacy would you like to leave?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because obviously it always starts with the family being the first stage of legacy, and that is just to be remembered for being an enabler and a positive role model to my own child and to my family. But I think we need to start thinking beyond that as women. So I'm very interested in the idea of legacy and public space for women. and how important it is to collect your mess and to collect all the artifacts to keep your story together whilst you're alive, so you have something meaningful to pass on. So one level, really, the legacy is more than I inherited, a few photographs, black and white, and to instill in my own daughter a sense of the importance of capturing her ideas, not just treasuring her things, and putting them on paper and really keeping hold of them. And on a bigger level, obviously, the legacy of this project hopefully would be to be a reference point for generations to come. But sometimes you just do things without necessarily asking to be judged today. I'm just hoping that everything we do now will be of help and new knowledge and a really rich archive for the next generations. It's very hard to judge yourself. I'm definitely trying to make people understand the need to have this as a foundation for any public life.
Yes. Yes, we encourage peak performance. That's what I work with lawyers for, peak performance. And one of the things I've noticed with you is that you're an action taker. So what would you say to someone who maybe struggles with having their idea and then actually executing it or putting it out in the world, which you have been able to do?
I would say partner with somebody that can help you get it done. Ask yourself what are strengths, and in a way, if you struggle to identify them, there are tests out there that can help you see yourself in the mirror in a way that maybe you can't quite see without help. And then ask, what does this need to be, to take off, and find somebody that can complement you, and co-found. You don't have to be a lone wolf. You can collaborate and still achieve and feel a sense of pride that you've done it. So not everything has to be done. Actually, I'm not a big fan of stuff being done in isolation as a one central character that owns it all. So it's fine, it's doable. If you have an idea and you don't know where to start, there are people that are happy to help. It's extraordinary. You just need to say, I've got this idea, what do you think? And you're already starting the conversation, and you never know where it takes you. So just don't keep it in your head, get it out of there.
Great. That's wonderful advice. And I noticed that you are up for the, the 2018 finalists for the Legal Personality of the Year at the Nexus Award coming up. So that says that you have made an impression upon the legal community, of that you're trying to make a difference, and you're succeeding to, maybe not to your most highest degree, but you're really succeeding, whether you're impacting others and you're helping others who, in the law firms, for example, helping others in the law firms who don't fit the mold of the work, being a thoroughbred racehorse to go full force 150%, and also making a difference of, hey, we women really count here. Let's find out our history. So I would say with your legacy, that one word stands out to me is that you care.
Yeah, totally. But I think, you don't think you do it because it's not because you think of the outcome. I didn't set out, although I'm, very ambitious, and I'm not an apologetic ambitious person. I don't like to think small, but I didn't set out to be remembered. I set out to do the best I could do to change something.
Yes.
So, all the recognition is amazing. And obviously, I think, to me, it's a recognition of the fact that the face of the profession is male. we're going in that direction. And I have a slight concern about the implications of not owning our new role, because that can result in all of us losing.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to be paid less? Are we going to lose in status? Is there, we have enough research now to say whenever a profession is dominated by women, they end up losing as a category. So I don't want that to happen. I want us as professional women to be able to maintain our income, to status, all that comes with it, just the same when the men had before, without having to pay literally
Mm-hmm.
for wanting equality. So I
Yes.
think there's still work to be done beyond, but I think without the knowledge and the foundation to be able to rebuff ridiculous arguments, you make it more difficult for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically can say, it's like, when a firm is established 1819 or whatever, you say, wow, you've been going that long. It's a sign of pride. It's something you think, yeah, I feel there's solidity, there's respect, there's all these things, We have to feel the same way. It's a profession established in 1919, 100 years, but we're not going to be paid less, or we're not going to be lesser lawyers than the men before just because we're the majority. So I guess for me, I think that the reason I'm a finalist is because obviously I drive change for the business, purely on a business level. But my legacy to the profession is to say, just because you're a woman, you don't have to be discounted. So the next century can't be a century of cheaper women in law,
Yes.
So we must be careful and must understand what we are asking for and shape the future in a way that we're not losing out. So although it's not a kind of, I haven't changed the law or I haven't impacted, legislation, I think I recognize the changing face of the legal profession and the importance of women knowing what they want as the next century. So I assume that's maybe linked to the recognition. But I only do it because I care. You're quite right. And because I'm a doer, it's a good combination for me because I'm not afraid.
Yes.
And that always helps.
Yes. So the final question that we ask our lawyer of the week is, name one thing or more that you do to manage your stress levels.
I cook.
Yeah.
You see how fast that came? So I cook every day. I'm quite, I like to make sure we all eat well and healthy and everything. And I just find that time quite helpful in terms of drifting.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I did see, for example, that maybe if you asked me 10 years ago, I would say, I like to cook and have a glass of wine. I would say the glass of wine is no longer helping distress. So it's mainly cooking by itself without the wine. But yeah, so I like to do that and to make sure that we are all there as a family and we catch up. And I just love when my daughter says, "You haven't asked me how my day was today." I just think it's so wonderful that she leads that way, and she then tells us about her day, and it just puts it all in perspective. Um, and it kind of gives that sense of personal progress, if you like, which is always forever changing when you have a young child. So it's a really good antidote to the rushing around that we known for as parents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Dana, thank you so much for being the lawyer of the week. And I really intend to keep up with your progress because everything you're doing is just so amazing to me, and and making a difference. And that's what's most important to me, is that we make a difference, that we try to make a difference. And thank you for sharing your journey
Yes,
with us today. It was very much appreciated.
it's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, I look forward to welcoming you to our event and to staying in touch.
Great. Thank you very much, Dana. Thank you for joining Lawyer of the Week. As always, I encourage and support each one of you to achieve your own peak performance, move your law practice to the next level, and create your own legacy. I love to read your comments about how you achieve peak performance in your law practice below.